Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 871A, and today's date is January 19th, 2016, and the title of the episode is The Economy is Failing, and this collapse will be much worse than 2008. Let's get right into the economic collapse financial news. Now, this collapse that is coming, we're in the first phase of it. We're starting to see the collapse. It's rearing its ugly head. And it's occurring in a lot of the emerging markets. It's occurring in Europe. It's occurring in Canada and many other areas. And eventually it will all flood back into the United States. And we are seeing that countries are falling into recession. They're falling into depression. And it's getting harder and harder for people in these countries. Out in Brazil, they are going to cancel the world famous carnival celebrations in Rio, and their country has been hit by a terrible, terrible recession, and this is the worst since 1930. And this is spreading throughout South America. We're seeing that many countries in Europe are also in a recession/depression. We see Canada is being hit with inflation as the loonie loses its value. And the banks in Canada right now are looking at the situation, and they're looking to cut the key interest rates to zero, and they might even go negative to compensate for falling crude prices. Now, they're expecting to cut its overnight target rate by 25 basis points, which is very interesting because the Fed here in the United States increased the Fed fund rate by 25 basis points. And as the economies turn down in all of these countries, most of the central banks, to keep their system alive, to keep the system propped up, they will go to zero, then they will go to negative. And when this doesn't work, they will go into the banks and take the people's money. This is what they've been planning on. Now, throughout Europe, throughout the United States, we are seeing a lot of job layoffs. I mean, last Wednesday, General Electric, they announced they're going to be laying off 6,500 jobs in Europe over the next 2 years, including 1,700 jobs in Germany, 570 in the UK, 765 in France, and 1,300 in Switzerland. The French nuclear group, Areva, announced plans for a 6,000 job cut worldwide, including Germany and the United States, and 2,700 in France. British Airways is eliminating 5,800 jobs under a plan to cut its debts, on top of the 7,600 jobs they've already cut from. If you think about this, it is just getting worse and worse as time goes on. France's large state-owned electricity firm, EDF, is cutting 4,000 jobs. Their rail operator, SNCF, is laying off 1,400 people. And we see at this point in time that France is falling apart. They are collapsing. This is why they had an economic emergency, which the president said, okay, we're going to start creating jobs. Why do they have to start creating all these jobs? Because they're losing all of these jobs. Air France is going to cut 2,900 jobs between 2016 and 2017. We're seeing Tata Steel is going to cut 1,000 jobs in Britain. Royal Doulton, a ceramics group, is going to cut 1,000 jobs in Britain. European banks, they have announced over 30,000 job cuts for 2016. Two of Europe's biggest banks, Barclays and BNP, plan to unveil job cuts to slash 10 to 20% of their investment banking costs. We're also seeing Johnson & Johnson. They're going to be laying off 3,000 jobs in their medical devices division. Tiffany's, they are going to be cutting jobs in their stores. Why? Because what they're saying is that in America, sales have fallen by 8%. In Asia and Pacific, they've fallen by 9%. And guess what? As we go throughout this year, it's going to get worse. This is why we see all these retail stores coming out and saying, you know something? We didn't make the sales this holiday season, which we knew they weren't going to do. Because how possibly can they make the sales if people don't have jobs. And I'm not talking about the 1, 2, 3 part-time jobs. I'm talking about a secure full-time job at the pay they were making. If they don't have that job, they're not going to go out and spend the money. They're going to be very nervous. They're going to keep a lot of their money that they're making, if there's anything to keep. But anything that they do make is going to pay for their cars, their houses, their electricity, their gas, and any other bills. Because you have to remember, their entire household was created on that full-time job. The bills don't go down, but the salary is. So most of these people are going to struggle at this point. Delta Airlines is saying that their fourth quarter earnings is in decline. And they're projecting that it's going to get worse in 2016. So far, we have been hearing news that the economy here in the US and across Europe, in Canada, in Australia, is doing absolutely horrible compared to what the president said, where the economy is doing fine. So, again, I believe he is lying once again. Right now, as we know, retail sales, they've dipped to a record 6-year low here in the United States. This is the worst since 2009. And the Baltic Dry Index, it has fallen again 6 points, down to 363. Right now, North America is in an industrial recession. Actually, I say industrial depression. Now, this is coming out from Moody's. They're saying what they're looking at right now in North America, they're looking at manufacturing. They're saying that, well, manufacturing is doing so poorly, it could enter a recession. I think they're a little behind the curve here. I think we're way past the recession. We are in a depression when it has to do with manufacturing. They're saying that U.S. industrial production has been in decline for 3 months in a row. And they're looking at the situation and saying, yeah, things don't look good. Well, of course they don't. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that this economy is going absolutely nowhere. Now, the oil prices are continually being suppressed down. We're seeing that oil has dropped below $30 per barrel. And the last time we had a crisis, back in 2008, it was the subprime mortgages. But this time, it is oil that is playing a starring role in the global financial crisis. Since the start of 2015, 42 North American oil companies have filed for bankruptcy. 130,000 good-paying energy jobs have been lost in the United States. And at this point, 50% of all energy junk bonds are distressed. And this is coming from Standard & Poor's. But this oil crash is nothing to cheer about as far as the big banks are concerned. And these banks gave out billions upon billions of dollars in loans to fund expensive drilling projects all over the world. Now those firms are dropping like flies, and the big banks could potentially be facing a complete catastrophic loss, which is going to impact their balance sheet. For instance, Wells Fargo is sitting on more than $17 billion in loans to the oil and gas sector. The bank is setting aside $1.2 billion in reserves to cover losses because of the deterioration in the energy sector. JP Morgan Chase is setting aside an extra $124 million to cover potential losses in its oil and gas loans. It warned that the figure could rise to about $750 million. So everything that they're giving us right now, I would double it. We're also seeing Citigroup. They're up to $300 million. And they're also saying this number could go much, much higher. So right now the banks are telling the public that everything is contained. Now we've heard this before, back in 2008 with the subprime crisis. where the Fed came out, the banks came out and said, don't worry about it, everything is contained, which tells us it's not contained. And what this means is that this is going to be a complete and full breakdown of the entire banking system. There's going to be huge losses because we're seeing the oil prices continually drop. And I don't see it going up anytime soon at this point. The IMF is out there and they are basically reworking their global outlook for 2016, and they've cut it once again by 0.2%. So instead of having an economic growth of 3.6%, they lowered it to 3.4%. But we have to look at the IMF record. When have they ever been right with their predictions? Not once. And every time they come out with a prediction for the new year, it is always the opposite. So if we're seeing 3.4%, we can expect it to be about 1.7% or lower. And we can see that we are definitely heading in this direction very, very fast. The collapse right now is moving a lot faster than I believe the central bankers want it to happen. And they are definitely realizing that this is moving forward at a rapid, accelerated speed, and they're worried about this because they realize that they have to control what is going to happen in this economy. They need to bring it down when they want to bring it down. And when they do bring it down, or it falls by itself because they lose control, it's going to be worse than 2008, much, much worse. Because what we're seeing right now is that many of the bank lenders and bond holders are going to default. And this might come in 2016 of this year. And when these bank lenders and bondholders default, it will create cross defaults with other securities. Even more importantly, most oil price hedges, price swaps, derivatives, have also cross default provisions. So right now, the counterparty credit risk, when it begins to escalate, is going to see this entire system fall apart. And it's going to accelerate, and it's going to have a domino effect throughout the economy. And what's very interesting is that Zero Hedge had a story where banks were told by the Fed to continually mark oil at $49 to $59 and keep it on their books at this price. And the Dallas Fed Reserve denied this, but it doesn't really matter because what we're seeing is that they are actually marking their books with this oil price. And they're doing it. And what this means is that they are cooking the books. They're lying about what's really going on. And when this whole thing falls apart, the whole thing is going to come crashing down. So we see many, many aspects of this economy where it's built up on lies, it's built up on manipulation, it's built up on a interconnected scenario where once it comes down, the whole thing is going to completely fall apart. So let's take this one step further. A report that came out on January 8th was quite shocking because the total international reserves held by the central banks, excluding gold, expressed in US dollars, amounted to about $11 trillion as of that date. The decrease in reserves thus amounts to precisely $1 trillion as of January 8th. This gigantic fall of about 8.31% of the maximum amount of reserves, which is $12 trillion recorded on August 1st of 2014, took place over the course of 17 months, whereas the growth of the reserves to its maximum figure took 70 years. This fall in international reserves, which went from 12 trillion in 17 months to 11 trillion, is an indicator of a worldwide economic slump, which will become a severe depression. So when we put all these pieces together, we see everything right now coming to a head. Now, as we know, the United States plus Germany plus France plus Russia made a deal with Iran, the P5+1. And we know that this had nothing to do with nuclear weapons. We see already the Iranian banks, because we have the head of the international affairs of Iranian banks, they have gathered in Iran's central bank, and they are now preparing to join the SWIFT banking system. And we can see already the U.S., the IMF, the central banking staff, they're all ready to go into this system and place their natural reserves, their oil, on the U.S. dollar. This is what the deal was really about. This was the backroom deal that they were making. This is why they wanted this so badly. Remember, John Kerry came out, listen, if we don't make this deal with Iran, the dollar is going to collapse. I think at this point, we're a little too late for this. And I think at this point, they realize it. That it took way too long. The deal was made, and this will not prop up the system at this point. And they're still going to try to get Syria because they believe if they can get Iran, if they can get Syria, and they can go back into all the Middle Eastern countries, they can keep this system propped up and operating long enough to start some type of war. This is what they've been trying to do. And we can see at this point that the economy is deteriorating so fast that they will not be able to stop this. And for those who have not prepared, you need to start preparing. For those who are preparing, continue to prepare because it's only going to get worse. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.